Okay, so hi there, folks. Thanks for being here today, and a very, very special welcome to the best-selling author Jeff Goins. Jeff has written the books Wrecked, The In Between, You Are a Writer, and just a few weeks back, hot off the presses, The Art of Work. And I would like to speak with him some more in detail about his book, The Art of Work, today. So, Jeff, thanks so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
That's wonderful. So can you tell us for the people who are not familiar, who haven't quite managed to hear about the title, The Art of Work yet? What is the book about?
Yeah, the book is about finding your calling. It's a
Mm.
book for anybody who feels like they were born to do something significant. And really it speaks to that itch that I think most of us feel that we're missing out on what life is really supposed to be made of.
Mm.
I think the thing that most of us are looking for, that sometimes we feel like, yeah, I just don't feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. In the book, I think I call that a calling, your life's purpose, and lay out a surprising process to get there. I think one of the reasons why we aren't doing what we're meant to do is because we believe these myths about what it takes to actually live a meaningful and significant life, and I explore that in the book.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think another thing that you point out to, I mean, you've mentioned the point about, living these myths and that kind of take us away or take us on detours from living our life purpose. But you also highlight the importance of not only staying on track with our life purpose and coming into alignment with that, but also, how important it is to strike the right work-life balance so that you don't end up being entirely consumed by your purpose or,
Yeah.
losing friends, family, near and dear ones along the way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of those myths that we believe is that a calling is, a job or something that you do, and I argue that it's really your whole life, and it's the person that you become. And if you treat it like that, then you can't. If you treat it as a job, then you can kind of neglect everything just for the task, right?
Mm.
Family, friends, relationships, and I, tell stories of people who've done that. People like Stephen King, who then, was a drug addict and an alcoholic and estranged from his family really at the height of his career. I mean, he was his most famous, most successful when his life was falling apart. And in his memoir on writing, he talks about how he wrote entire novels that people love him for that he doesn't even remember writing.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I think there's a lesson there, right? Like
Yeah.
that if you're chasing success just for the thing itself, the achievement itself, then you can
Mm.
actually be like succeeding and not be enjoying the success because you're not making room in your life for all of the relationships that really, I think, make up a meaningful, purposeful life. And Stephen King woke up to that, and he realized that life was not a support system for his art. That in fact, it was the other way around. Art or work, is a support system for life. And I think as a writer, my life should feed my writing, and my writing should feed my life.
Mm.
And when I'm doing that well, things feel good, they feel sustainable, they feel healthy. When things are out of whack, when I'm neglecting my craft and I'm spending too much time doing other things, it kind of feels like procrastination.
Hmm.
As much as I love being a husband and a dad, if I'm just doing those things and I'm not writing, I do feel like I'm sort of not fulfilling my ultimate purpose. But on the other hand, when I'm just doing that and neglecting all of these other relationships, no amount of success feels good enough when
Mm.
the people that I love are sort of estranged from me. And I've done both, sadly, and I do think that it's not so much about balance as much as it is about managing those necessary tensions.
Hmm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and the book has been doing extremely, extremely well. I read that you've placed on the Publishers Weekly bestseller list, the USA Today bestseller list, Washington Post, and Amazon bestseller lists. I'm really delighted for you. I think that's a really fantastic success that you can certainly be very proud of and celebrate. How does that make you feel putting a book out there that so many people can really connect with at such a deep level?
Yeah, I I mean, that feels great. Thank you for saying that. One of the things that I write honestly about probably all of my writing is this sense of, is this it? Is this all there is? And I sort of felt that way, not to sound ungrateful or anything, because I don't feel that way. But every time I achieve something and I go, this is going to be it, like this is going to be the thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll finally be happy or whatever. And then when I get there, I go, this is nice, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not all there is to it. I remember my friend Michael Hyatt talking about how years ago he had this goal to become a New York Times bestseller, and then he hit his goal, and he said, "Man, that felt great for like an afternoon." And then the next day,
Only an afternoon, really.
Yeah, right,
It didn't last
exactly.
any longer than that.
No, and then the next day I woke up and it was just kind of back to normal. And he talks
Mm.
about this, and we talked about this a while ago on a podcast of mine. He talks about the point of a goal is, the feeling of accomplishment. The reason we set goals, one of the reasons, is sort of the psychological feeling of, this is fulfilling and satisfying to have something to strive for and then accomplish it. But like 80% of that satisfaction comes from the the journey, not the actual destination.
Mm.
So I mean, achievements are great, but what keeps me motivated day in and day out is not this thing that I did last week or last month or a decade ago. It's, am I doing what I'm meant to be doing today? And I don't want to undersell, goals and achievements, because I'm a pretty goal-oriented person. But every time I achieve a new goal, like finishing a book and having, a best-selling book in this case, I have to be very careful, because I know my tendency is to sort of wallow and, and find all the things wrong with what I did, as opposed to looking for all the things that right I did. And so the best, most healthy thing for me to do is to start a new project, and that's what I'm doing now. Is I'm trying to get busy doing something else. Otherwise, it starts to feel empty, and you realize that I've just got a drawer full of trophies or something, and to show for my life. And I don't want to live my life in the past. I want to continue to strive for the next thing. And in the Art of Work, I talk about that. Actually, I talk about how calling is not a destination, it's a journey. I think most people think about, I found my purpose, and then I went and did things. I went and lived my life. And I think that we find our purpose as we live our lives. And you can be intentional about that. It's not an accidental process necessarily, but it is a mysterious process. And I think that it lasts your entire life.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And so I also understand, Jeff, from your personal story, that you've shared this with us on on your blog, but also some of it in your book, that you made the leap from being a paid employee working for somebody else to being self-employed and being a full writer. How did that, or in what way did that inspire you to write the book? And what other sources of inspiration did you have? What made you say, I need to write a book called The Art of Work?
Yeah, I had some dumb name for it, and then my agent helped me find a better name for it, which he often does, so I appreciate that. But that was kind of the reason I wrote the book, was I went through it. People were asking me about it. How do you do this? How do you make the leap? How do you kind of create your own, the kind of work that is fulfilling to you? How do you create your own dream job? And so I wrote the book sort of with that in mind, as me being a case study, and then saying everything that I did. And I finished that book about over a year ago, and I didn't like it very much. And so what I did was I went out and found other people whose stories in some way paralleled mine, but in other ways maybe contradicted, or there were other aspects to it. Because when I read a book by somebody and they say, I did it and you can do it and just do these 7 things, it may be true, but I don't believe it. I'm a skeptical person, and I can't write a book that I wouldn't like reading. And so but in contrast, when I read a book full of lots of different stories, it gives me lots of different entry points to the main idea, and I find it much more accessible. So I went in search of people, really just kind of cast the net wide and interviewed hundreds of people, and started to see, some consistent themes, which actually surprised me. And I mentioned this in the book, that this book, much like the process of finding your calling, surprised me the way it came together.
Mm.
And that's, kind of the interesting thing about it. I think in the art of work, everybody who found their calling, it surprised them in some way. It was something that they didn't expect. Certainly not nothing that they planned. And writing the book was very much the same process. And so I interviewed all these people and then highlighted a few
Mm.
archetypes, a few main characters who I felt exemplified a certain stage of the journey. But it was a really neat process because by the end of it, I understood this thing that I went through at a much deeper, more profound level than I
Mm.
did before. And I hope that that's what the reader gets out of it as well, that they understand their life in a deeper, more significant way. And there's just, they have a multitude of stories and ideas and opinions of ways that they can build for themselves a meaningful life.
Mm, yeah, and I have to say the stories that you share that come from other people, they are very inspiring, very very heartfelt, heartwarming, and I tend to be kind of a crier when I'm reading things that are heartwarming, so I was
Yeah.
there, every time I got to a passage with a story, I thought, oh gosh, I need to pull out the Kleenex and kind of dab my eyes.
Yeah.
But they were really, really lovely. And I can imagine that when you are um, compiling and researching so many different people's journeys, and you encounter so many of these wonderful stories, that, there are probably a lot that don't make the cut into the book because you've got a limited amount of space, between those two covers.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if the book could be something like a DVD that has the deleted scenes section.
Yeah.
Are there any stories that really stick out in your mind as something that you thought is a really wonderful story, but unfortunately didn't go into the book? Is there something there that you could share with us?
Gosh, that's a great question. One of the reasons why I chose the stories that I did was because I wanted variety.
Hmm.
So being a writer, and kind of putting the word out there through social media and through my email list, I got a lot of people sending me their story, and it was, hey, here's how I became a writer, here's how I became a novelist, and I was like, okay, great, great, great. But I've got that story covered, so I didn't want to retell that. I would have to think about that. I really did feel almost in kind of this mysterious way. I felt called to these particular stories because as soon as I heard them, I was like,
Mm.
"That's it. That's what I need to tell." One
Mm.
of the things that I did cut a lot out of the between the first and the second draft, as I mentioned before, it was basically my story and what I learned. In the second draft, I brought in all of these other people, and then we went through like 7 more drafts. But the big difference between those first 2 drafts was how much of my story I pulled out. And I pulled almost all of it out. And I had a friend read it. And she goes, "Where are you in this book? I can't even find you." So then I sort of put more of it back into it. But it's
Mm.
mostly other people's stories, and then I'll occasionally use things that I learned as an illustration. So I could write another book like a memoir or something just of my journey of how I close that gap between where I was and where I wanted to be and the 2 or 3 year process it took
Mm.
to get there. So the main story that probably got cut was mine, and I'm glad it did because much like you, Lisa, I had that same response to the stories as I was hearing them.
Mm.
I felt honored to
Mm.
not only hear them, listen to them, but be able to share them with the world.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so, do you have a favorite part or a favorite passage from the book?
That's a good question. Um, because it was like the first thing that people read, and I knew that it had to hook people. I wrote and rewrote the introduction
Okay.
like 100 times, probably so many different times, figuring out how do I want to start this book.
Mm.
So yeah, one of my favorite stories, and a story that I feel sets up the book really well, is that story of Garrett Rush Miller and his dad, Eric
Mm-hmm.
Miller. Garrett's the 5-year-old boy who gets a brain tumor and is given 5 years to live. And then when I interviewed him at 18 years old, he had lived well past that 5-year window. He and
Mm.
his dad had completed over a dozen triathlons. He when he went into surgery to remove the brain tumor, he was left blind, mute, and paralyzed, and he was able to overcome a lot of those things. Obviously, being able to complete a triathlon, climb Machu Picchu, become an Eagle Scout. I love that story. I mean, that is an incredible story. They started a foundation. I mean, they are national heroes. They've been recognized with lots of different awards. But it was really an honor to talk to them personally and hear their story. And I mentioned this in the book, but the lesson that I learned from Garrett is that what makes a life extraordinary are not the chances we get, but what we do with them. And that's the idea that sort of surfaces again and again in the book. Quit thinking about what could have been or worrying about your missed chance or lost opportunity. Instead, take whatever hand that's been dealt to you in life and try to make the most of it. And that's what a calling is, not a perfectly planned life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so for a person who is, who bought your book because, they're trying to figure out how to align their life purpose with how they earn a living and with, friends and family obligations, community obligations, and everything else. And I think that it can be very challenging to kind of create a happy marriage between the two of, earning a good living and also fulfilling your purpose.
Right.
So what would be your number one piece of advice?
For doing that, for trying to, kind of manage that tension between I want to do what I love, but also make a living. There's this quote by Frederick Buechner where he says that your vocation, your calling, the thing that you're meant to do, is the place where your deep joy meets the world's deepest need. And in the book, I sort of expand on that and say you need to ask and answer 3 questions. And this will really help you narrow what you're searching for down a lot. Because I think a lot of people don't exactly know what they're meant to do. It's not just a matter of, I know what I need to do and then I can go do it. And at the same time, it's not feeling completely lost. Most people are somewhere in between exactly knowing and having no idea. That's really where I was. I had this vague, hazy notion that I wanted to be a writer, but I was afraid to admit it, didn't know what to do, and felt stuck when really I just didn't know how to take the next step. So the 3 questions that I think really help focus that are, what do I love? What am I good at? And what does the world need? And another way to answer that question is, what is something that I do without even realizing it? It just feels obvious and ordinary to me, but it's not necessarily obvious and ordinary to other people. It's amazing. Derek Sivers says, what's obvious to you is amazing to other people. And I think that we all have those things that are obvious to us, but amazing to other people. And I think, really, I think everybody has that. And the best way to figure that out is to get in community. Ask some friends or family members, what's something that I do that, that I don't even realize how amazing it is. Well, one of the chapters of the book is about a woman who gets kicked. She becomes, her name's Ginny. She lives in Singapore. She becomes a mom. She gets pregnant, and her boyfriend breaks up with her. Her parents kick her out. She gets pregnant out of wedlock, which is a big taboo in Singapore. She basically has nobody. And then her aunt takes her in, and this other friend kind of comes alongside her, and somebody else comes into her life. And even though it looks like she's a self-made woman, she still needed this community of people to help her. And I think that every story of success is really a story of community. So that's a long answer, but I think the advice, the way to answer that question is ask those questions about, what do I love? What am I good at? What does the world need? And ask those questions in the context of community where people can help you figure out the answers and help you kind of step into that in ways that are much less risky than trying to do it on your own.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I know you talk also in the book as well about this notion of being an apprentice and finding a mentor, finding people who can offer you guidance and support along the way.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yep. Yeah, that's. I mean, that is that process. I call it the accidental apprenticeship
Mm-hmm.
because with a few rare exceptions, most of us are not going to find some teacher or mentor who's going to pour into us, for the rest of our lives. Most of us are going to have to kind of go through life and cobble together a bunch of different relationships that over time create this usually informal education process that helps prepare us and also helps us practice for our life's work.
Mm, mm, yeah. And I think that something that's really great that you've done that also builds on this notion of having a community to fall back on and to support you is that you have also created for the art of work this highly interactive online community of people
Yeah,
who buy the book, who read it, who then do the exercises at the end of the book and start sharing what they're doing, discussing, what you talk about in the book and how they're applying it to their own lives, to their own
yeah.
situations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in that community?
Yeah, that's an incredible thing. That's honestly just sort of felt like an afterthought to me. I was like, well, like I the book is a bunch of stories, but there's a lot of practical stuff that you can do. So I'll write in an appendix, basically breaking down these ideas so that people get it. And you can just kind of
Mm-hmm.
rush to the end of the book and go, okay, I get the main idea. You can just skip through all the stories if you want. And then even there, I was like, I could keep writing and writing on this. This could have been an entirely other book. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like books are great conversation starters.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have to sort of be the last word. And really, a book is effective when it begins a conversation amongst friends and they can kind of work out the ideas. Even fiction books, I think, are this way. I read The Great Gatsby for the first time a few years ago and immediately called my friend and I was like, "What is it about? And like, is it about greed or is it about love? Or
Yeah.
I want to know what the meaning is because it created this cognitive dissonance for me, and I had to wrestle through some of the ideas
Mm-hmm.
broached in the book through story. And so I wanted to do something, in a much less grandiose way, I'm sure, with the art of work. So what's been interesting about that is it's been neat. This is not a book about quitting your job necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're reading this book and you realize that you're not doing what you're meant to do,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no place for you to apply your passion, then some sort of decision obviously has to be made. And so I just saw the other day that this woman quit her job as a result of not just reading the book but listening to a podcast that I did. So who knows what's going to happen, with
Mm.
this, Lisa.
Yeah.
That's neat to me. That's really, I mean, that's amazing.
Mm.
I was a recipient of that. I mean, I went to a conference, and at that conference, a speaker came up. It was a conference about how to do your dream for a living, and I didn't even know what my dream was. And this speaker said, "Okay, a lot of you, like, who here doesn't know what they want to do or what their dream is?" And a bunch of us raised our hand, and I finally reluctantly raised my hand. And I felt ashamed because, like, aren't you supposed to be at this conference because you know what your dream is and then you just need to go do it? But probably over half of the room had raised their hand. And he said, "Okay, great, put your hands down." He
Mm.
said, "You're lying. You do know what your dream is. You're just afraid to admit it."
Mm.
And I don't know that that's true for everybody, but
Mm.
that was true for me that day. And as
Mm.
soon as I heard that, I wrote down on my notebook as I was taking notes, writer. I'm a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of things ended up changing as a result of that, which was, it was this communal effort of somebody saying something, it moving me, and
Mm-hmm.
then I took action. And then there were all these other people, all these other guides, teachers that kind of popped up in my life
Yeah.
as I began to do this apprenticeship work to, ultimately become a full-time writer.
Mm.
So in some ways I feel, responsible to do the same thing for other people, to continue that process of, here's an idea, now discuss it, work that out, and then go do something with that. And every day we see there's
Mm-hmm.
a Facebook group for anybody who's bought the book called The Art of
Yeah.
Work. And every day we see some message like that. Hey, I just decided I'm supposed to do this, or I,
Yeah.
went and found a mentor. or I quit my job. It's
Yeah,
pretty
people are
amazing.
sharing all kinds of amazing and fantastic things there. That comes
Yeah,
up in my Facebook feed as well. So
yeah,
it's
it's
really
amazing.
it's really inspiring to see, to see that kind of spark that you've lit, for other people to kind of start really firing their passion with.
Yeah.
And so I'm tempted to ask you, Jeff, what's next for you? But I read on your blog that you've given a very Seinfeldian answer, which was nothing. Um, but you did say that you had a book idea, and at the beginning of this conversation, you said that you want to keep moving with whatever the next thing is.
Hmm.
What can you share with us what that might be, or is it too soon to say, or are you going to enjoy doing nothing for a little while first?
Yeah, so I'll qualify that nothing and say I'm not doing nothing. I'm doing the thing that's so difficult for me to do, which is focus on the current book, right? I mean,
Okay.
as a writer, this book, to me, is 2 years old,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I've been working on this thing for 2 years. I mean, I wrote it over a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
and people are, most people just started reading it, in the past couple of weeks. So to me, it's old news. I remember speaking at a conference a week after my first book came out, and somebody came up and bought a copy of my book, and I signed it, and they said, "So what's next?" And I said, "Oh, I don't care about this book anymore. I'm working on this book, and I'm so excited about this new idea that I have." And a friend of mine was there, and he goes, "Don't say that." I go, "Why?" He said, "Well, first of all, they just bought that book. Second of all, when people are asking you what's next, like, you need to understand that they care about it, but what they really care about is the book that they can get their hands on right now,
Mm.
and you need to honor that." And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think that's I have this tendency to just kind of move on to the next thing and burn the last bridge. But
Mm.
as a reader, I know. I mean, I saw that new Steve Jobs book came out the same week that my book came out,
Mm-hmm.
and if I were the author of that book at this point, a month later, I would go, "That's old news." But as a reader, I'm going, "That's a brand new book. I need to get my hands on it and read it sometime this year, and it will still feel new to me."
Mm-hmm.
And there are books that, as I'm sure you and a lot of people do, that I read that are, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years old sometimes. Most books I read, I don't read as soon as they come out. So if that's what most readers do, then why, as a writer, am I moving so quickly on to the next thing?
Mm-hmm.
So there's two sides of the answer. One side is I'm really focusing on this message because I believe in this message, and I want to see
Mm.
more and more of, like, that woman in the Facebook group. I want to see more people change their lives as a result of this message. That's
Mm.
why I wrote it. But as an artist, the next healthiest thing that I could do is work on the next thing, work on the next book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't. I would tell you what the book is about if I knew, but it's just sort of this spark of an idea right now. But I will
Okay.
say it's
Yeah.
kind of based around the idea of being a starving artist, or this ideal that you can do what you love and not have to worry about money or opportunity or any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or this idea that like, at some point, somebody didn't have to worry about it, and
Mm-hmm.
this comes from this place of frustration that I see a lot of writers, artists, even aspiring entrepreneurs go, "Well, I can't do what I love because I don't have the money," or "I just want to do this as a hobby because if I did it to get paid, it would corrupt it." And
Mm-hmm.
I think money and art, or passion, however you want to describe it, have always had this necessary but tenuous relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and at best it's this really strong tension. At worst, it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a fascinating idea to me. And when I write books, I try to pick something that fascinates me and sort of build on it. And I will also say that when I write a book, I can't help about halfway through start thinking about the next book. So every book that I write, I put like a clue, just because I'm sort of fascinated with it, not because I'm trying to be sneaky or something, but kind of like an Easter egg, in movies or
Yeah.
something. I put a clue in the current book for the one that's to come,
Okay.
because I want every work to have, a thread woven throughout all of them, and
Mm-hmm.
also because I start researching that idea and it kind of rubs off on the current book that I'm writing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read The Art of Work a couple of times, I think you'll start to see he could expand on, this topic or that topic, and
Mm.
one of those will be the next book.
Mm. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I will be sure to keep my eyes peeled for the next book when the time comes. And so we're just about out of time, so we'll need to bring things to a close. Jeff, it was fantastic to have the opportunity to speak with you today, and I hope that everyone watching this recording has really enjoyed it and has really benefited from it. And I hope that the art of work has the desired impact that you intended it to have, Jeff, for everyone whose life it touches, and for them to work towards a life of greater meaning, greater happiness, and greater purpose. And I'd also like to thank Tom Morkis of tommorkis.com very much, and also Jonathan Mead of paidtoexist.com very much for establishing the connection between myself and Jeff to make this conversation today possible. So thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for writing the book. Thanks for putting it out there. And thanks for speaking with me today. And to everyone watching the recording, you can get more information about the art of work on the website www.artofworkbook.com. And I'll be sure to post those links for you as well. So thanks again, everyone, and take care.